Sullivan's offer was simple. Take the position, point out Jules' mistake during the presentation, and the job was Dan's. He had until morning to decide. He spent that time calling her instead. The fluorescent lights in the Hartwell and Associates break room flickered twice before deciding to stay on. Jules counted that as a win. Small victories were the only kind she could afford. She poured the last of the communal coffee into her mug, the one she'd brought from home, because buying a cup from the cart downstairs cost $4, and she had exactly $93 left until Friday, and stood at the narrow window that looked out onto the street below. It was 7:14 in the morning. She had been here since 6. The city was still deciding whether to wake up. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She knew before looking. The buzzes had a particular rhythm now, the urgent, apologetic pulse of her mother's care facility number, and her stomach had learned to drop in anticipation of it before her eyes even found the screen. "Good morning, Miss Castillo. This is Diane at Maplewood. Just a reminder that the outstanding balance from last month." "I know," Jules said. "I'll handle it by Friday." "Of course. We just want to make sure." "By Friday," she said again, and kept her voice warm enough that Diane would hear it as a promise rather than a deflection. She had learned that particular skill over the past 2 years, the art of sounding certain when you had no business being certain at all. She hung up, drank her coffee, watched a taxi driver below argue with a cyclist with the cheerful intensity of people who have nowhere urgent to be. 11,000 for $100. That was the number. That was what the next 3 months of her mother's care would cost, above and beyond what insurance covered, above and beyond the payment plan she'd renegotiated twice already. $11,400. And Jules Castillo was a first-year marketing analyst making $41,000 a year before taxes, which worked out, after rent and utilities and the bare minimum of food, to approximately nothing. The internship conversion, a permanent staff position at Hartwell, paid $68,000. Benefits included paid time off, the kind of stability that let you stop doing math in your head every time you bought groceries. There were 2 interns up for the position, her and someone named Daniel Okafor who had started 3 weeks ago and who she had not yet spoken to but had already decided she didn't like, on the basis that he existed and she needed the job. She refilled her mug with water because the coffee was gone, returned to her desk, and got back to work. Dan had 19 tabs open. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that 4 of them were loan repayment calculators displaying slightly different versions of the same terrible news, and he kept switching between them, as if one might eventually show him a number he could live with. None of them did. He closed all 4. Opened a 5th. Closed that one too. His student loan balance stood at $94,200. This was down from $112,000 when he graduated 18 months ago, which represented real progress by any objective measure, and which felt like standing in the ocean watching the tide come in and noting with academic interest that you had moved slightly up the beach. The interest rate was 7.4%. The monthly payment was $890. His rent in the room he shared with 2 other people in a 3-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that his Georgetown classmates would have described as up-and-coming, in the way people describe places they have never considered actually living. His rent was $780. His salary, after taxes, deposited $2,890 into his account each month. $2,890 minus $890 minus $780 left $1,220. Food, transit, phone, the occasional emergency, the slow erosion of small expenses that accumulated into something that felt, at the end of each month, like a leak he couldn't find the source of. He was fine. He told himself this regularly, in the specific tone of someone who has decided that the alternative to being fine is not available. The internship conversion would change the math. Not fix it, not immediately, but change it. The salary jumped to $68,000. The loan payments would still be there, but they'd stop being the central fact of his financial life. They'd become a problem instead of a crisis, and that distinction mattered enormously. 1 position, 2 interns. He'd heard about Jules Castillo before he started. Someone in the office had mentioned her. She's good, very sharp, don't underestimate her. With the particular tone people use when they want to prepare you for a competitor while maintaining the appearance of helpfulness. He'd looked her up on LinkedIn. Marketing degree from a state school, 2 years of agency experience before Hartwell, a portfolio that was genuinely impressive in a way that annoyed him because he'd hoped it wouldn't be. He arrived at his desk at 7:45, which was earlier than required and later than she got in, a fact he discovered by the simple method of noticing that her desk light was already on when he reached the floor. He glanced toward her station across the open-plan office. She was looking at her screen with the concentrated expression of someone doing actual work rather than performing it. Her coffee mug said something he couldn't read from this distance. Her hair was pulled back in the practical way of someone who had made peace with the fact that the morning had more important demands than aesthetics. She did not look up. He sat down, opened his laptop, and got to work. They were assigned to the Meridian project on a Tuesday. Marcus Webb, the senior account director with the permanently loosened tie and the habit of delivering bad news with excessive cheerfulness, delivered the assignment in the glass-walled conference room with the energy of someone announcing a team-building exercise rather than a competitive audit with a 3-week deadline. Meridian is looking at a full brand repositioning, he said, clicking through slides with the confidence of a man who would not be doing the actual work. They want research, strategy, and a preliminary creative direction. The two of you will split the workload and present jointly. Sullivan will review before it goes to the client. A pause. Obviously, this is a significant project. Obviously, Jules thought. Obviously, Den thought. They looked at each other across the conference table for the first time with full attention. The look lasted approximately 2 seconds and contained a remarkable amount of information. Hers said, "I've been here longer. I know this office. I know what they want and how they want it." His said, "I have a Georgetown MBA, and I will not be managed by someone who hasn't acknowledged me yet." Both of them smiled politely. "Happy to collaborate," Jules said. "Absolutely," Den agreed. They left the conference room and did not speak again for 4 hours. The Cold War had its own etiquette. They divided the research without explicit negotiation. Jules took consumer data and market positioning. Den took competitive landscape and financial modeling. Because dividing it was more efficient than fighting over it, and efficiency was the one thing they could agree on. They shared a shared drive folder. They updated it at irregular intervals, each checking what the other had added with the careful casualness of someone trying not to appear to be checking. Jules noticed that Den reorganized her file structure. She reorganized it back. He reorganized it again into something that was, she had to admit after staring at it for 10 minutes, actually slightly more logical. She left it. Den noticed that Jules wrote comments in the margins of the shared documents, small observations, questions, connections between data points that were more useful than he'd expected them to be. He didn't respond to the comments, but he incorporated the insights without acknowledging their source, which was its own kind of response. They were in the office late on the third evening, the floor mostly empty, the city outside darkening into the particular shade of blue that meant it was past 8, and the people who left at 5 had already eaten dinner and were watching television in the warm light of their homes. Jules had kicked off her shoes under her desk. She did this when she thought no one was looking. Den had noticed, but said nothing, filing it away under the category of information that was not useful and that he kept thinking about anyway. He was on a call, something about a data source, and she was compiling a slide when her phone lit up on the desk beside her keyboard. She glanced at it. A notification from her banking app. Red. The kind of red that meant the number below, it was not a good number. She turned the phone face down quickly, but not before Den, returning from the kitchen with 2 glasses of water. He'd started doing this, bringing water for both of them, without comment or expectation of acknowledgement, caught the movement. Not the content, just the reflex. The particular, practiced motion of someone hiding something they're ashamed of. He recognized it because he had the same reflex. He set her glass down beside her keyboard, said nothing, went back to his desk. She looked at the glass, then at him. His back was to her. "Thank you," she said. "Sure," he said, not turning around. A pause. "Long day," she offered. It was not quite an opening and not quite not one. He turned his chair slightly. "Yeah." Another pause. The kind that, in a different context, would have been comfortable. "The Meridian data is more complicated than Marcus made it sound," Jules said. "Marcus makes everything sound simpler than it is," Den replied. "It's a management strategy." She looked up. He was half smiling in a way that made him look suddenly different, less guarded, less calibrated. "More like a person." "That's cynical," she said. "That's accurate," he said. She almost smiled. She didn't, quite, but it was close. The moment of actual breaking happened 10 days into the project, on a Wednesday night at 9:30 when the office was entirely empty except for the two of them and the security guard downstairs who had waved at Jules with the sympathetic recognition of someone who saw her too often at too late hours. Din was at his desk. His laptop was open. He had stepped away to the printer, and his phone, face up, which was unusual, a small deviation from his normal practice, lit up on the desk. Jules was not reading it. She was walking past on her way to the kitchen. She genuinely was not trying to read it. But the screen was bright, and her peripheral vision was functional, and the words were large enough. Payment overdue, National Student Loan Services, amount. $890. She kept walking. She filled her glass, stood at the kitchen sink for a moment, looking at the dark window that reflected her own face back at her. $93 until Friday, she thought. And he has $890 that he can't make. The math of other people's impossibility felt, suddenly, very familiar. She went back to her desk. Din returned from the printer, picked up his phone, and turned it face down with the automatic motion of someone who had done it 10,000 times. His expression didn't change. That was the thing. His expression never changed, and she understood now that this was not composure. It was practice. The practiced neutrality of someone who has learned that showing the weight makes it heavier. She knew that practice. She used it every time Diane from Maplewood called. "Din," she said. He looked up. Something in her voice made him cautious. "Do you want to take a break? There's a place around the corner that does decent sandwiches until 10. He looked at her for a moment. "You're asking me to dinner." "I'm asking you to a sandwich," she said. "Don't make it more than it is." He almost smiled. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, okay." The place around the corner was a narrow deli with 4 tables and a Turkish owner named Sim who recognized Jules by her usual order and gave them both extra pickles without being asked. They sat across from each other with turkey sandwiches and bad coffee in paper cups, and for the first 10 minutes talked about the project because that was the only safe territory they had established. Then Din said, without planning to, "My loan payment bounced this morning." Jules looked at him. "I saw," she said. "I wasn't trying to. It was just, the phone was up." He nodded. He didn't look embarrassed exactly. He looked like someone who had been carrying something for a long time and had briefly set it down without meaning to. "Georgetown," she said. "Yeah." "How much?" He told her. She didn't flinch, which he appreciated. "My mother is at Maplewood Care Facility," Jules said. "Early onset dementia. She's 58. She picked at the edge of her cup. "I have $11,000 to cover the next 3 months before my payment plan runs out, and they have to reassess her placement." Din was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been managing that?" he asked. 2 years since the diagnosis. 14 months since she moved to the facility. "By yourself?" "My brother sends what he can. It's not much." She looked at the table. "I don't say this to anyone at work because it feels like, I don't know, like wearing your desperation on the outside." "Yeah," he said. "I know exactly what that feels like." They sat with that for a moment. The deli was warm. Sim was watching a soccer match on a small television behind the counter. The sound turned low. "We're competing for the same thing," Jules said. "We are. And we both need it for reasons that aren't abstract." "Yes." She looked at him. "I don't know what to do with that." "Neither do I," he said honestly. "But I'm glad I know it." Outside, a bus went past. The fluorescent light above them flickered once, held. "We should go back," Jules said. "We have a lot left." "We do," Din agreed. They went back. But something had shifted in the geometry of the office. Not dramatically, not with any declaration. Just a degree or two. Enough to change the angle of everything. The next 2 weeks had a different quality. It wasn't that the competition disappeared. The position was still won. The stakes were still real. But something had been said in the deli that couldn't be unsaid, and it changed how they moved around each other in the office. Less like opposing forces, and more like 2 people doing hard work in the same space. Small things changed first. Din stopped reorganizing her files without telling her. He started leaving comments, actual comments, responsive ones, on the things she wrote in the shared document margins. She started doing the same with his models, catching a formula error one afternoon that would have embarrassed him in front of Marcus and saying nothing except sending him a quiet message. "Check the Q3 projection, cell D47. I think the percentage reference is off." He fixed it. Sent back. "Thank you." 2 words. She read them 3 times. They started working side by side instead of across the room. Not assigned, just gravitational. Din would pull his laptop to the small conference table around 7, when the office thinned out, and Jules would appear 20 minutes later with her coffee and her notes and sit at the other end without asking or being asked. The conversations began in the work and moved out of it slowly. She told him about her mother before the diagnosis, a woman who taught middle school math and grew tomatoes in containers on the apartment balcony and laughed loudly at her own jokes. He told her about his father in Lagos, who had worked 2 jobs to send Din to school in the States, and who called every Sunday morning and asked, with careful optimism, how things were going, and to whom Din always said fine. Everything's fine. It's going well. He doesn't know about the debt? Jules asked. He knows there's debt. He doesn't know the number. Din turned his pen in his fingers. He'd offer to help. He doesn't have it to offer. So what's the point in him knowing? The point is that he knows you. Din looked at her. You're surprisingly direct for someone who took 2 weeks to learn my name. I knew your name on day 1. You called me Daniel for the first week. That is your name. Nobody calls me Daniel. I didn't know that yet. She was almost smiling. It was becoming harder and harder for her not to smile around him, which was inconvenient. He smiled first. A real one. Unguarded, slightly crooked, the kind that happened before the person could decide whether to let it. She looked back at her screen. Den, she said. Yeah. I think the Meridian strategy is actually good. I know. We built it. I mean, I think it could actually work for them. Not just as a pitch, as a real repositioning. He looked at the slides on his screen. The consumer data mapped against the competitive landscape, the creative direction suggested by the overlap, the brand voice framework they'd built at midnight last Thursday with cold coffee, and a disagreement about adjectives that had somehow become a collaboration. Yeah, he said quietly. I think so too. They looked at it together. 2 people who had started as adversaries and arrived somewhere entirely different without a single moment they could point to and say, that's when it changed. It had changed the way things change when you're not watching, gradually, then all at once, then irreversibly. The rain started on a Friday evening and didn't stop. By 8 o'clock it was coming down in the persistent, serious way that made umbrellas mostly theatrical. Jules had forgotten hers. She forgot it reliably, which her mother used to tease her about, which was a memory she could still hold without it hurting too much if she was careful. Den had his. They stood at the building's entrance looking at the street, which had become a system of reflections. I'll walk you to the subway, he said. You'll get wet. So will you. I can handle wet. I know you can. He opened the umbrella. I'm not offering because I think you can't handle it. I'm offering because I want to. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the steady, unhurried patience that she had originally misread as arrogance and had since understood was something else entirely. A man who had learned to be certain about the things he was certain about and quiet about the rest. Okay, she said. They walked. The umbrella was not quite big enough for 2 people, which meant they walked close. The city at this hour was a different city, less performance, more function. People moving with their heads down, the storefronts closing, the restaurants filling with the warm light of people who had finished their weeks and were celebrating that fact. Can I ask you something? Den said. You can ask. If you got the position, he paused. If one of us gets the position and the other doesn't, what happens? Jules was quiet for a moment. The rain fell around the umbrella's edge in a fine curtain. I don't know, she said. I've been trying not to think about it directly. That's unlike you. I know. She watched the sidewalk. I think what happens is that whoever doesn't get it has to figure out something else. And that something else is very hard. She looked at him briefly. But I also think, I don't know how to say this without it sounding like something from a movie. Try. I think that whatever is happening between us, whatever this is, I don't think I want to lose that to a job title. She said it quickly, the way you say things that are true before you can decide they're too true to say. Even though the job title matters enormously. Both things are true and I don't know how to reconcile them. Den stopped walking. She stopped too. They were standing under an awning now. A bookshop, closed, its window full of stacked paperbacks going soft in the humidity. The umbrella dripped. The street was quiet. I'm not going to pretend the competition isn't real, he said. It is real. The stakes are real. I know. But I also know that I haven't felt this. He stopped. Tried again. I've been very alone with the hard parts. For a long time. And in the past 2 weeks, I've been less alone with them. That's not nothing. No, Jules said. It's not nothing. They stood there a moment longer than was strictly necessary. The rain kept on. A couple passed behind them, sharing a newspaper over their heads and laughing at something. "Whatever happens with the position," Den said, "I want you to know that I'm on your side." She looked at him. "We're competitors." "We're that too," he said. "Both things." She thought about her mother in room 14B at Maplewood, with the tomatoes she used to grow on the balcony and the loud laugh. And she thought about the number 11,400, and she thought about how lonely it was to carry a specific and serious weight through a world that was mostly unaware of it. And she thought about this man standing in the rain, making a declaration that was both small and enormous. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Okay, you're on my side." She held out her hand in the particular way of someone establishing the terms of something. "And I'm on yours." He looked at her hand. Then he took it, not to shake it, but just to hold it, briefly, in the rain, in front of the bookshop window, in the light of all those unread stories. "Deal," he said. She laughed. It surprised her. A real one, sudden, the kind she hadn't made at work in months. They walked the rest of the way to the subway, closed together under the too small umbrella, and when she went down the stairs and he went the other direction, they did not make any particular farewell. They just went. And that was enough. Richard Sullivan occupied the corner office on the 14th floor with the settled authority of a man who had decided, somewhere in his 40s, that spaces should conform to him rather than the other way around. He was 61, silver-haired, and possessed of the particular charisma of people who have spent decades being listened to and have begun to confuse that with being right. He had built Hartwell and Associates from a 2-person consultancy into a 36-employee firm with a client list that included 3 Fortune 500 companies. He was smart, methodical, and entirely unsentimental about people in the way of someone who has learned to think of personnel as variables. He noticed the interns because it was his business to notice things. He noticed, specifically, the way they had stopped being adversaries and become something else. The shared conference table after hours, the coordinated rhythm of their presentations in the weekly check-ins, the particular ease of 2 people who have stopped calculating each other and started trusting each other. Trust was a problem, not in the abstract. Trust was fine in the abstract. But in the context of Hartwell, trust between 2 people meant a unit, and a unit could negotiate, could hold positions, could refuse things individually that they would not refuse separately. Sullivan had managed people for 30 years. He knew the difference between 2 employees who got along and 2 employees who had formed something. He called Daniel Okafor into his office on a Tuesday morning. Would actually demonstrate integrity. Done the way Sullivan suggested, pointed specifically at her, in the moment, with the implication that it was her oversight rather than a shared challenge they'd address together. It would be something else. He came into the office on Wednesday, and Jules was already there. She was at the conference table, slides open, frowning at something on her screen in the particular way that meant she'd found something she didn't like and was deciding how to deal with it. She looked up when he came in. Something in his face made her look a second time. "You okay?" she said. "Fine," he said. "Long night." She looked at him for a moment longer than a question about fine warranted. Then she went back to her screen. "I found a way to address the Gen Z sample problem," she said. "I supplemented with a third-party panel study that covers the demographic gap. It's not perfect, but it's defensible." She turned the laptop toward him. "Tell me what you think." He looked at the data. It was good work. Exactly the right approach. Honest about the limitation, substantive in the supplement, defensible under scrutiny. "That's good," he said quietly. She watched him read it. "Denver." He looked up. "Whatever is going on," she stopped. "I'm not asking you to tell me. I just want you to know that I notice." She said it simply, without expectation. "That's all." He sat down across from her. He thought about what Sullivan had said, about the institutional memory of firms, about loan servicers. He thought about his father calling on Sunday mornings, asking how things were going, and Den saying, "Fine, everything's fine, it's going well." He thought about Jules standing in the rain in front of the bookshop saying, "I don't want to lose this to a job title." He thought about what it meant to be on someone's side. "Sullivan called me in yesterday," he said. She went still. He told her everything. He told her precisely and completely, the way he would have wanted to be told if the positions were reversed, Sullivan's offer, the framing, the methodology gap, the implication about debt, all of it. He watched her face as he spoke. It cycled through several things: a tightness around her eyes, a stillness in her jaw, and then, underneath both of those, something that he recognized because he felt it too. The particular clarity that comes when you understand the shape of something that had previously been formless. When he finished, there was a silence. "He knows about your loans," she said. "Yes. And he used it." He implied it. Nothing explicit. Jules looked at the table, then at him. "Why are you telling me this?" He thought about how to say what he meant. "Because not telling you would be a choice I couldn't live with," he said. "And because I've spent a lot of time lately making choices based on what I can afford, and I'm tired of that being the only consideration." Jules was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay. Okay. We handle it together." She pulled the laptop back toward her. "He wants a split. So we don't split." She looked at the slides. "We present this as a unit. Everything good about this project is good because we built it together. If he wants to separate what we each contributed, he's welcome to try, but the client is going to see two people who function as one." Den looked at her. "That doesn't solve the position problem." "I know." She met his eyes. "We'll deal with that part after." It was not a plan. It was a direction. But directions, he had been learning, were sometimes enough. The Meridian presentation was on a Thursday. The client, three people from Meridian's leadership, including their CMO, a woman named Patricia Haynes who had a reputation for precision and a very low tolerance for anything that smelled like performance, arrived at 11 and were seated in the 14th floor conference room with its view of the city and its aggressive air conditioning. Sullivan sat along the side wall, in the observer position, with the composed expression of a man who has arranged something and is waiting to watch it unfold. Den and Jules stood at the front. They had stayed in the office until midnight the previous 2 nights. Not panicking, working. They had stress-tested every element of the strategy, addressed every potential objection, refined the creative direction until it was not just plausible, but genuinely compelling. They had also, quietly, decided on exactly how they were going to handle the moment Sullivan was waiting for. Jules opened. Her section covered the consumer data, the market research, the audience insight, the emotional landscape of the Meridian customer. She spoke with the particular confidence of someone who knows their material and also knows why it matters. She acknowledged the Gen Z sample limitation directly, early, without defensiveness, and walked through the supplementary panel data with the transparency of someone who has nothing to hide. Patricia Haynes made a note. Den took over for the competitive analysis and financial modeling. He built the case methodically, the way a good structure is built, foundation first, then the weight-bearing elements, then the details that gave it texture. He showed how Meridian's current positioning was leaving a specific segment of premium customers underserved and exactly what recapturing that segment was worth in revenue terms. Then Jules came back for the strategy. And here was where the thing they had built together became visible in the room. Because the strategy was not a document, it was an argument, and the argument ran continuously between her insights and his analysis, each supporting the other, each building on the other, the way a genuinely collaborative piece of work carries the fingerprints of 2 minds rather than one. Patricia Haynes set her pen down. She looked at the 2 of them. "I want to ask something that's slightly outside the scope of the presentation," she said. "Please," Jules said. "This work," she gestured at the slides. "Is this a division of labor, or did you actually build this together?" Den answered. "Together." The strategy came out of the intersection of the consumer insight and the financial modeling. Neither would have the same shape without the other. Haynes looked at her colleagues briefly, then back at them. "I've been through a lot of repositioning pitches," she said. "Most of them are very polished and entirely theoretical. This one reads like it was built by people who thought seriously about whether it would actually work." A pause. "That's unusual. It's what we need." Sullivan shifted slightly in his peripheral chair. Haynes turned to him. "Richard, I want to talk about the engagement structure." "Of course," Sullivan said smoothly. "We can discuss. I'd like this team on the account," she said. "Specifically, I understand you have staffing decisions to make, but I want to be direct. The coherence of this work depends on the people who built it. If the team changes significantly, that changes my confidence in the outcome." The room was quiet for a moment. Sullivan looked at Jules and Den with the expression of a man running a rapid internal calculation. Den looked at the table. Jules looked at the window. "I think we can accommodate that," Sullivan said. His voice was smooth. His expression was not. The debrief happened without fanfare. Sullivan called them both in separately, Jules first, then Den, and offered the conversion positions with the particular graciousness of someone making a decision they have not chosen to make. The language was professional. The tone was neutral. There was no acknowledgement of the Tuesday conversation, and Den did not bring it up, and that non-acknowledgement was its own form of information about how these things worked. They each said thank you and meant it, for different reasons than Sullivan intended. Jules sat in the break room afterward, at the small table by the window, and looked at her phone. She called Maplewood. "Diane," she said when the line picked up, "I'm calling about the outstanding balance. I can make a payment Friday, and I'd like to discuss a longer-term arrangement for the next several months." She said it the way you say things when you know, for the first time in a while, that you actually have a foundation under the words. Den was at his desk when she found him, loan calculator open again on one of his tabs, but this time he was looking at a different number. A projection. What the debt looked like with a salary that wasn't $41,000. How long it took. When it ended. It ended. That was the thing. When you ran the numbers with the right salary, it actually ended. He closed the tab, opened the Meridian project folder, wrote a note in the shared document. "Good work today? All of it." 3 minutes later, a comment appeared in the margin. "You too. All of it." They left the office at 7. Not because the work was finished. The work was never finished. That was the nature of the work. But because Jules said, "I think we can stop now," and Den said, "Yeah," and they both understood that some things needed to be marked. Outside, the evening was warm, the city in the generous mood it sometimes found in early June when the light lasted and the air hadn't yet become insufferable. They walked without deciding where, which was its own kind of decision. "How are you feeling?" Den asked. Jules thought about it. "Strange. Like I've been tensed for so long that now I don't remember how to be untensed." "That'll take a few days. Has it happened to you before?" "Once," he said, "after I got into Georgetown. I'd been working toward it for so long that when it happened, I just stood in my apartment for 20 minutes not knowing what to do with my hands." She laughed. "What did you do eventually?" "Called my dad." She was quiet. Did he know? He knew the acceptance. Not the acceptance plus the debt that came after it. He paused. "I'm going to tell him the full thing. When I go home at Christmas." He looked at her. "You were right. The point is that he knows me." She nodded. "He'll handle it better than you think." "Probably." They walked for a while in a comfortable silence. The particular silence of two people who have learned each other's pace and fallen into it without effort. "I want to take my mother somewhere," Jules said. "On my next day off. She has good days and bad days, and on the good ones she knows where she is and what's happening, and she loves the botanical gardens." She looked at the sidewalk. "I've been saying I'll take her for 3 months. I kept thinking I couldn't afford the time. And now I'm going to take the time." She looked up. "The money was never actually the only obstacle. I think I was using it as the only obstacle because it was the one I could do arithmetic on." Den understood this. The way a solvable problem becomes a stand-in for all the unsolvable ones. "Come with us," Jules said. "If you want. It's just the botanical gardens." "But," she stopped. "She'd like you." She liked people who are serious about things. She used to say that sincerity was the rarest kind of intelligence. He looked at her. The evening light was doing what it does in early summer. The long, amber, unhurried kind that suggests the day is not so much ending as gradually deciding to do so. "I'd like that," he said. She nodded. Something in her face settled. Not the relief of a resolved problem, but the quieter thing that comes after, when you understand that what you've been carrying has a different weight now because you're not carrying it alone. They reached a small park, 3 benches, a fountain that wasn't running, a tree that had somehow survived decades of urban indifference. They sat on the bench nearest the tree without discussing it. "Den," Jules said. "Yeah, that thing you said. In the rain. About being on my side. I meant it." "I know." She looked at the fountain. "I've been thinking about why it mattered so much. I think it's because," she chose the words carefully, "I've been operating as though needing help is the same as being weak. And being weak means being at risk. So I've been very self-sufficient in a way that is," she paused, "somewhat exhausting." "Very self-sufficient," he said. "Somewhat exhausting," she agreed. "And then this happened. And I found out that someone knowing my actual situation, not the managed version of it, didn't destroy anything. It just made the load slightly more possible." He watched her. I'm not very good at this, she said. At saying what I mean when what I mean is personal. You're doing fine, he said. I'm saying that she stopped. Started again. I think you're someone I want in my life. Not just in the office. In my actual life. She said it with the directness of someone who has decided that the cost of not saying it is higher than the cost of saying it wrong. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I know that's what I want. Den looked at her for a moment. Jules, he said. I've known that since the rain. She looked at him. Then why didn't you? Because you needed to say it first, he said simply. You needed it to be yours. She stared at him. That's annoyingly perceptive. I know. She shook her head. But she was smiling, the unguarded kind, the sudden kind, the one he had been quietly collecting since the first time he'd seen it appear in the break room over bad coffee at 7 in the morning. He reached over and took her hand. Not formally, not as a gesture, just the natural extension of something that had been moving in this direction for weeks, finally arriving. She looked at their hands, then at him. Okay, she said, for the third time since they'd met. But this okay was different from the other ones. This one had no caution in it at all. 6 weeks later, Jules's mother, on a good day, sat in the botanical gardens and looked at the roses with the complete attention of someone who has learned not to take good days for granted. She was wearing her yellow cardigan, the one she'd had for 15 years and refused to part with, because some things matter most when they are old. Den sat beside Jules on the bench across from her mother's wheelchair. These are the David Austin ones, Jules's mother said, pointing at a cluster of pink blooms. The old-fashioned kind. They smell like something. She looked at them. Do you garden? No, Den said. But I'd like to learn. Jules looked at him sideways. Her mother studied him with the lucid, unfiltered assessment of someone whose social filtration had simplified. You seem like someone who does things properly, she said finally. I approve of that. People who do things properly are easy to trust. Thank you, Den said. Don't thank me. It's an observation. She looked back at the roses. Jules's father did things properly too. That's why I married him. A pause. She gets it from him. The doing things properly. And the worrying too much, which is the other side of the same thing. Mom, Jules said. I'm not wrong, her mother said serenely. Den caught Jules's eye. She was trying not to smile. Failing. He reached over and, quietly, without announcement, covered her hand with his on the bench between them. Her mother did not appear to notice. Or she noticed and chose not to comment, which was its own kind of approval. The roses moved slightly in the warm air. Somewhere in the garden, a child was asking someone to explain something. A cloud passed, and the light shifted and the whole garden went a shade more golden. Jules looked at her mother's face, the particular softness of a good day, the expression she recognized from before, from years ago, the version that had always meant home, and felt something in her chest that she couldn't name exactly. Not quite happiness, not quite grief. The complicated thing that lives between the two when you're paying very careful attention to a moment you know is precious and temporary and entirely real. She turned her hand over and held Den's. He held back. That was enough. That was, actually, everything. The farmhouse they eventually found, not for another 2 years, not until both their situations had stabilized into something resembling a foundation, was 40 minutes from a small town that neither of them had heard of, with a garden that needed serious work and windows that didn't quite close all the way in winter. They bought it anyway, because some things you buy not for what they are, but for what they make possible. And what this made possible was a Saturday morning in early spring with the windows open despite the cold, coffee going, the sound of the garden waiting to be dealt with, and no urgent mathematics anywhere in sight. Den was at the kitchen table, laptop open to a spreadsheet that was not a loan repayment calculator. Jules was on the phone with Maplewood, not because of a crisis, but because of a good day. Her mother had apparently asked to be taken to the botanical gardens again. And could they arrange something for the following weekend? Yes, Jules said. Yes, we can arrange that. She hung up and stood for a moment in the kitchen of the house that needed work, in the early light of a morning that had nowhere urgent to be. Good news. Den asked. Good day, she said. She wants to see the roses again. He smiled. We could all go. We should all go. She looked out the window at the garden. The real one, the one that was theirs now, that needed attention and patience and the willingness to start things that wouldn't pay off immediately. But first someone has to do something about whatever is happening with those beds along the fence. That someone is probably me, he said. It is definitely you. He closed the laptop, got up, put his arms around her from behind, his chin on her shoulder, both of them looking out at the overgrown beds and the early light and the considerable amount of work ahead. Ready? She said. Not even slightly, he said. She laughed. The real kind. They went outside anyway.